sponsors, too sexy content, Bond, and Chaps, too sick, Bond and Chaps. We're going to talk about the new CDF. All right, the guy who just asked me at the coffee machine, what does CDF mean? Client Dependency Framework. All right, I'm happy you came to my session. The Client Dependency Framework, what does it do? It takes care of making sure that next to the HTML that gets output from default.aspx, all the JavaScript and CSS and everything else gets sent, links get sent down the line. And it can get quite complicated very quickly, because being an extensible framework, we have, of course, many you could have modules that want to roll out specific features for different things. So I'll name a couple of complexities. The framework ships with a jQuery library inside of it. Some module vendors ship their own jQuery library when they deliver their module and say, well, use that, etc. How do you solve potential conflicts between these two libraries then going out over the wire to the client? Another complexity is some vendors might expect jQuery to be served, but you need to be able to alert the framework to say, well, please send out jQuery as well. I need it. I know you're a big jQuery fan. Yeah, I'm sure you run into these kinds of issues. So, why did we want to revise it? There are several reasons. One of them was, first and foremost, we were working on the MVC pipeline, and I saw some of the work coming in from Sasha to reconnect what we had with the Client Dependency Framework in MVC pipeline. And I thought, well, this is not right. That looks like very hacky to get it to work this way. Also, during that work, I found out that actually the module caching had a flaw in DNN, which is if you use an ASCX to output your code, you would include the tags DNN, DNN, CSS include, something like that, and then a name and a path to your library, etc. And that would work because what it actually did, when it output that over HTML, it would include a commented out bit of HTML with some curly braces. This library, that path, and priority 15. Huh? So then you see in module caching, it would catch the text blurb that was generated and go like, oh, I should also send these out, right? So module caching, what it does is it takes your module, whatever you render, as a blurb of HTML text, and just caches it in a file by default somewhere. And then when you ask the page again, it says, well, okay, nothing changed, boom, I just output that. But of course, if your module needs CSS and JS to run, it needs to send out that CSS and JS again, otherwise your blurb is just empty, right? So there was this flaw that if you programmatically added JS and CSS, which is the case in a ton of other solutions that DNN has, then that blurb was never, that little curly braces magic code wasn't output into the module caching. So module caching didn't work for the majority of my modules in any case. And so yeah, there were quirks that solve certain issues as well in DNN. And so I decided to go deeper and just check what the hell actually the Client Dependency Framework was doing. I knew a bit about it already, but this time I decided to go deep and just check a ton of code. Now, the way the old Client Dependency Framework worked was it leveraged a DLL, Client Dependency .core, I think, .dll, or just .dll. And what it did was it allowed you to add controls to the web forms page. So you would say, well, add this thing, and then it would go, oh, I need to add a link control in HTML to this part of the page. It would go there and do that. If you would have DNN CSS exclude, which was a feature added later, and something that Timo, for instance, had done already with his skin objects from 40 fingers, it allowed you to go back into the control tree and then take one out. We say, I don't want default CSS, right? And just yank it out again. But you realize that all the time, while the page is building in the memory of IIS, we're adding controls to some div somewhere on the page, and we're going to remove them again. And we're going to add, and we're going to shift, and we're going to sort. And that, in a page lifetime cycle, becomes very fuzzy, because how do I know whether my page load method of my module runs before your module, or for this part of the framework, or for that part of the framework? You don't know. Some people will put it in page render, some other people in page load. So it's a bit of a clusterfuck, to be honest. And to top it all off, when I started digging down, of course, there is the fact that whole library, it had its last change 5 years ago, the Client Dependency DLL. The author clearly marked it as, I'm not doing anything with this anymore. With the note, you shouldn't be on .NET Framework anymore, you should be on .NET Core, so I'm not maintaining this anymore. So he's moved on. And he leaves a little note to say, well, you could go here to this, .NET Core thing that I'm doing, which does, it's lightweight, as he says. It does minification and combination, but that's it. And all the other links back in the day, we're talking about a year ago, just went, it was all a dead end wherever I looked, in terms of trying to find something that we could drop in and replace what we had. And so putting those two together, so on the one hand we're working on deprecated code, on the other hand we're working with something that really doesn't survive the transition to MVC pipeline very well. It is maybe the time to say, you know what, I think this needs to go and something else needs to come in its place. And maybe if we don't have the same feature set, this is actually fairly easy to do, because our main challenge is gathering it from all the modules, right, and from the framework, sorting it and outputting it to the right part of the page. Now, the one thing that was sacrificed in that, the two things, was minification and bundling. But bundling by now, I will start with minification. So minification, I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Back in 2005, that was a thing. The framework would do it for you, because people were crafting JavaScript files by hand, and just adding that JavaScript file with their module. When you look at what's been happening since 2010, there's a ton of JavaScript front-end frameworks that are being used by everyone: React, Angular, Vue, whatnot. And the build process includes always a minification step. right? If you create React code, you have to transpile anyway. It doesn't run natively in the browser, or it will soon, but that's not a point. Like you've created more or less a program that gets transpiled into JavaScript, and in that process, you turn on minification. So for most modern module developers, minification was not an issue anymore. Bundling, okay, so combining multiple files into one request, that also came from the HTTP 1 days, where every request you'd have a maximum of 2 requests going in parallel to the server, and therefore your browser needed to stack all the requests, meaning that if you had 10 files to download, it would be chunks of 5 chunks that it would get from the server, and that would, this would speed up the loading of a page. But with HTTP 2, that restriction is no longer there, and in principle, everything just comes in parallel to your browser. So that was also deprioritized, let's say, as a feature for what this new CDF should do. So all we're left with now is the gathering, sorting, and outputting it to the right place. And then, of course, benefiting from the fact that we could add all the new things, new tags that had appeared, because that was one of the underlying questions as well, is, well, you've now got async, defer, and whatnot for various files that we can add, and we have to do it kind of in a hacky way currently. Could we have more native support for all these new attributes of client dependencies? I did add a criteria to that, which is let's have a look, hard to end up with choice of resources, exactly. I would say, right, native, so it needs to, we talked about resource removal, right, earlier, the DNN CSS exclude. I wanted that to be more natively supported rather than the hacky way in which we do it nowadays. The name and version that we currently use. So if you have a library like, I don't know, you'd have, or a CSS file like Bootstrap, you can say, well, this is Bootstrap 436, and it's in my module. And then if another resource added Bootstrap 4.3, then it would not be output, but instead the 4.3.6 only would be output over the line. And the Fluent API, no interfaces, that is what I wanted to come to, which is when we get all these new tags, I can imagine that in the future, we're going 10 years down the line, I'm sure there's going to be new tags. So I don't want to create one single method to say add script with, I don't know how many parameters by now you could add, right? It needs to be something that we can extend the whole time, and needs to be kept concise and only burden the coder with the exact bits that he actually wants to have going on. And then, of course, first priority is it just needs to be more modern, just injectable. So you get with dependency injection, you get your thing. So what is running in the background now is we have this, right, no more control tree, no more like going directly to control tree, because in MVC that doesn't make sense. And we have a client resource controller now. And what it is you could see it as a bucket, basically. It's an object that gets created on every request, and you can inject it. You will get it. Oh, here's the bucket. I can add to it. I can remove from it, and it just gets passed on to the next method that gets it. And at the end, at render time, it goes like, oh, okay, the bucket, here we go, sort, and oh, you want this section, okay, I'll put that out here, and that, you know, you want that section, it goes out there. And now we have native support for fonts, for instance, as well. So you'd have obviously style sheets and scripts, but also add, you know, create font. And that with a Fluent API. So this is what the process more or less looks like. Right? A request comes in, we initialize the bucket, everything's empty. We gather them from the framework and the extensions, sort, filter, and then output them to different providers. Anyone know the client resource providers? Exactly, good. Some people had their coffee this morning. All right, so the way it works is as follows. You have the client resource controller, which needs to be injected somewhere. I hope it's legible actually, in blue. You will create something, which actually in the bucket says, I want to create a new resource, please. And you get that returned. And when you create it, the creation method takes at least the path. This is like the minimal parameter that I need. Well, if we're going to add a JavaScript, then I would at least need a path. So create script, this is the path. Now I can set certain parameters of that resource. Let's say set name and version, and set provider here, for instance, right? The DNN form bottom provider in this case. And I need to finish with register. Well, that's very important because that actually sends that resource that you just created back into the bucket and says, okay, now it's done. And so we have 3 create methods: create script, create style sheet, and create font. And each of them returns a typed Fluent builder. Right, render time sorting. So that's the thing now that becomes a little bit easier to understand from the framework code perspective when it actually happens. It's like, okay, now I know that all sorting is going to be done at render time. So what it does is collects everything. We have the file order. Duplicates are resolved by name and version, and resources can still be removed during the whole registration process. How to use this? All right, let's have a look at some code. Yay. Let's have a look at this. I have this website running, which is an MVC pipeline website, but it's running in web forms at the moment. It's got a CSS file and a JavaScript file output to it. You want to see the CSS? The CSS is here. It's basically giving a background background color of light blue to that little div that we had, and the JavaScript is a get rid of that chat and make that smaller. It's a trivially simple JavaScript component or React component that sits on that div, and all it does is just update a counter and shows the count. Now, obviously, those need to be sent to the browser. So in In my home controller, where I have index, the index method, I'm just calling the client resource manager, the core client resource manager, and saying I'm going to register this style sheet, and there we go, it's demo.css, and I'm going to register the script, which is demo.js. So far, so good. Any questions about the existing code? This is the old code that I want to adjust. Now, this is an MVC controller in DNN, and it supports dependency injection. We know that now in most places of the DNN core, all the underlying code for your module can now accept dependency injection. So web API controllers, MVC controllers, portal module base, several others. I am going to go with the client resource controller, that one. All right. Yep, that looks like what I want. And there you go. So, and yes. Okay. Bravo to GitHub Copilot here. That's that's what I wanted. So I'm injecting the client resource controller, and now I get it basically. I get the client resource controller in my code, and that client resource controller, I'm going to create a script. Good heavens, on a small screen that's always a challenge. Create script. Let's first see what is the script. It's going to be this one. And what do we always need to do? Register. Otherwise, nothing happens. Right. Similarly, client resource controller dot create style sheet. There you go. Create. It's actually with a lowercase s, I think. There you go. I'm going to take these out. Now, with a bit of luck, if I recompile this, we should still have a page with with a blue bar, and there we go. So I'm still getting these client resources now. But now I can, for instance, with this, because this is a Fluent API, with this I can set priority, set fetch priority, set defer, for instance, right? And actually that's done like this. If we look at the current code, let's have a look at the page source, and we're going to find the demo.js. There it is. It's there. It's a script source that type text JavaScript. Nothing else added. That's what it is. I'm going to set it to defer, and I'm going to set provider. Set provider. Is it resource providers? Client resource, client resource providers, that one. And then I'm going to go to DNN form body bottom provider, for instance. Right, let's do that. We'll see what it does. It probably doesn't make any sense, but it will compile. And I'm going to refresh the page. Now, the expected behavior is that it doesn't show up at the top of the page anymore, but now it's going to show up somewhere at the bottom of the page. And we're going to go to the page here, page source. I'm going to go and find demo.js again. And there it is. It's now at the bottom. And it's got the defer tag set. So far so good. Now the way the providers work is that it's basically just a string. It's a string that tells DNN how to filter what is being output. So if you go to your let's have a look at, let's briefly load DNN itself. I'll show you something you might not know. Come on. Website, .NET website. Let's go and find the page. And actually, I want that. There we go. Here we go. DNN resources. Do you see these controls here? All right. You see DNN resources 2 and 3, and here is a text provider. And that's what triggers it to output everything that you've added with your module, saying DNN form provider, DNN form bottom provider, but you could have foo bar, and in my module, I could say foo bar, and then it would show up there, right? It's just its own, these things are bound by text. There's just a convention in the current web forms that this is where we expect these scripts and style sheets to end up. I don't know what the future of that is with MVC pipeline, whether we still need 3 places where we inject. We might, one might evaporate in time, 1 or 2. I can't predict that, but it's an extensible system. Again, we could see, go as we want. All right. Any questions so far? Then it's all really, really clear. Excellent. Right. And then there's one more trick I have up my sleeve, which is you can have under .NET Uke. So currently that thing, okay, that sits in that library. These detailed extension methods, create script, set defer, set provider, they're all in the new client resources library that ships with DNN. Unfortunately, that's not yet in the NuGet package. So it's one thing to fix in one of the upcoming versions is that it also comes out with a NuGet package. There is one extension method in DNN itself, .NET Uke.services.client dependency. is you can also do, there's a shorthand for this, and it's easy to create your own shorthands, by the way, with this system. Dot client resource controller dot register. Register, what is it going to do? Register start sheet. And we're just going to take this one. And that's it. No, nothing, don't need to do anything more. Right? So that looks a lot like what we had before. The only thing is that this method doesn't have a lot of extra functionality in terms of adding those tags, those new tags that came along, etc. This was there just as a shorthand for, okay, I have this CSS file, I don't need anything special, just add it to the page, please. And if you look at the inside of that method, go to definition, you'll see all it does is it creates a style sheet and register. What it does. Nothing special. And
Peter,
yes.
on that method there where you were registering the script,
Right.
it was doing a check if it existed already. It was doing it against the URL. So
Here's the thing.
you've got a slightly different URL.
Yes. Yes.
It will duplicate it.
There is a, so the old code would, right, this is by default off,
Right.
right? Why? Because of performance reasons, right? If for everything that we add, we continuously go to the hard disk to ask if something is there, and you have to rework the URL that's there, that's asking a lot from the system every time you register something. So one design decision was also to remove that default to make it false. Because if I add a CSS in my module, I know it's going to be there. The only reason the check if exists is there is because in the, for instance, the container control of DNN, they'll say, well, you know, add container.css. And then it will check on the hard disk in the current version, like, is it there? Okay, I'll add it. The same thing with portal CSS and module CSS, and those are added by the framework by default and checked if they are there. All of those so that's preserved, but then you need to specify that. So in the framework, it will say, add this, add module.css, but check if it's there, and then it does it. But for your module, you know, if you've delivered something with your module, then you know it's there. We don't need to go back to the disk again to check if you've done it. Yeah, if you didn't include it in your zip file of your module, then that's on you. But yeah, I think it only makes sense. So yeah, there we go. So like it's still, you know, page still working. Right. Let's have a look. Well, we've seen these methods. Right, so the old API, obviously it wraps that logic, that new logic that is there. The next stage, of course, is that within your modules, you're going to slowly migrate to this new way of doing things. The methods of the old methods of the core have been marked as deprecated, meaning that in version 12, DNN-12, they will actually be gone. For me, so that it was an essential step to get to the MVC pipeline as well. Probably for all the MVC pipeline modules, the core methods won't even work. So you're going to go straight to this method because you're going to be injecting stuff anyway. So you get the client resources controller and you add your resources.
There's a quick show of hands. Whose site did I break with this change? Yours. Okay, well, it's not enough.
Actually, all the 2 sections, remember?
There's quite a lot of sites, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was, I can tell you some of the complexities of doing something like this is what I definitely ran into is the usage scenarios. It's so wide across DNN. So when I said create style sheet, right? Because it was DNN CSS include. I'm replicating that behavior to create style sheet. Jeremy Farms comes along, yeah, but I'm adding a font. It says DNN CSS include, not DNN font include. We don't have that. Yeah, but I'm using that, and then I'm changing this to that, and then look, it works. So, okay, we'll have to do some coding here to catch that scenario. So there's a lot of ways that people have used the old system to work around certain issues in our modern world of web development. So I wasn't upset, I wasn't not even surprised at the end of the day. But yeah, I had to, that's why we had 10.2.1, 10.2.2, 10.2.3, 10.2.4, because I was chasing all of these edge cases as they came out after the non-testing of the RC. Yeah. So just as a side note, we often have discussions, within the core team. How do we get more people to test the framework to avoid these kinds of mishaps? What we just talked about, right? The font didn't work, or whatever I broke in too sexy content. I don't know, but I managed to do that. The thing is this: it is. I'm more skeptical that you'll ever get the test coverage that you need in an RC phase. I think a few motivated individuals will download the RC, test it against their stuff, etc. But some installations it's just a lot of work to do that kind of testing, and people are like, oh, don't bother, I'm going to wait until it comes out. So I'm also more at ease with us just hammering through after 1 or 2 weeks of testing, boom, we release. And then we just stay alert for issues that come in. Hey, this feature just broke my site, can we find a fix? Oh.
I was thinking we use JavaScript integrity check.
Integrity check. Right. You can use that. It does have an extension method there, right? Let me see. You can set integrity.
Okay. Right.
And there you add your hash.
Yes.
Right. It's string, hash, and so if I add something random here, I believe that the JS file should now be rejected by the browser, right? Let's run that test. I haven't tested that, but that's good. There we go. So that the peekaboo 0 content error, this should disappear actually. Yeah. Didn't refuse it.
Does it
Let's have a
together
look.
with the CSP, I think, for reject.
Yeah, we have to, oh, maybe that's the thing. Yeah. Demo.js, let's go there. Yeah, the integrity is output, but yeah, you might be right. It's a CSP setting. To, might be. Do you know it off by heart? Come on, Google it.
Security?
Oh yeah, sorry, security. Thank you.
I think so.
Yeah, it is. I think it is.
My guess is your integrity SHA is obviously not a SHA, so maybe it's ignoring it.
Maybe it's that as well. Yeah. Yeah. I don't work with the integrities myself, so I couldn't quickly say. But is it supposed to be a particular type of SHA?
Say again?
Should it be a particular SHA? 128, 256?
256.
256. Yeah. There's text. There we go. We're going to go for 256, you said?
Yeah.
Let's get that.
I'll quickly ask AI to verify.
Okay. Let's see if that does the business. Oh wait. I was up here. Here. And there. And load again. All right. Oh, can't get that to work yet. I'm curious to hear, Art, what your experience will be. I'm curious to hear what your experience will be with set integrity. I don't use it personally, so I wouldn't know. But maybe there's a switch, or maybe this site shouldn't be in admin mode. I don't know. We'll see.
So apparently it has to have a prefix.
A prefix.
It has to have SHA 256 dash and then a base 64 encoded thingamajig. But it should actually refuse it anyways. So I
Okay.
don't know.
Okay. Yeah.
Probably using an insecure browser, maybe Edge.
Maybe that's the clue. It should be SHA 256 and then a dash or something.
Yes.
Dash. All right, let's try that. One more. We'll give it one more shot.
So Peter, I'm curious, would it already be possible, I mean, this is again future optimization, but with HTTP2, I
Right.
believe even the initial request could already include additional resources. Ta-da!
Ta-da! The initial request could already include the resources.
Yeah, so because one HTTP transfer could
Right.
contain a lot of files.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know it's a lot of extra effort, but technically you could include those files in the initial request already.
How?
I have no idea.
The because my understanding was that all of that is kind of at the level of IAS, which we don't really touch, or web.config, etc., like some of that stuff. But if there's something programmatically we can do, I'm all for it to see if we can roll that into the platform. I mean, I have a list of all the resources that should go out.
Yeah. And you have probably mapped them somehow to the right path.
Yeah. I mean, there's features there as well for CDN, right? If you have that's a feature that DNN has, is, let's remove that one again. Set CDN URL, right? And that way you can have something go out to CDN if the user has said that this site should use the CDN by preference. And then you have a fallback in your module, right? So you create the resource based on what you have in your module, and you will then say, well, my CDN version is over there. So that still works as well, that feature. Cool. Any other questions?
I understand, Peter, that the skin objects that you can use on skins, reject CSS, JavaScript, they already use this still.
Yeah.
Is there any change on the structure of these skin objects? Or it's fully compatible?
It's fully compatible, but if you need some of the special features, of course, then the problem with these skin objects is all of those properties that you add need to be supported infinitely in the future. So you need to be careful with the way you do the skin object. But let's go to.
No, my question is that the two skin objects that we have, DNN include or DNN something.
Yeah.
By default, if you don't change anything in your skin, they will use the new way.
Yeah. Everything uses the new way because I couldn't mix it. It had to be replaced all at once because otherwise I have a bucket here and a bucket there, which was not a way forward.
And it's transparent. You don't have to change anything on your skins.
No, you don't need to change anything on your skins.
So I'd like to add one minor detail. So if you're using it the way it's intended, then yes. Our problem with Sexy was that since we had supported the client dependency from long ago, and then we started adding more attributes like the integrity and stuff, the built-in API in the old DNN did not have that. The skin control did. So we programmatically created the skin control and added it to the page, and that failed after Peter's update because he did some dependency injection magic to make some things work, which wouldn't work otherwise. And when we programmatically created the tag, it failed. That's why Sexy broke in those cases where JavaScript was added with special attributes.
Here you see the inners of CSS include, and you can see that there's a bit of magic already going on behind the scenes. I needed to add this because of those special cases of Jeremy, where he's saying, well, I use this to load fonts as well. So now I'm parsing out to see if what you're adding is actually a font or not, in which case I will create a font. And in case we now also have preload as a Boolean, I believe is that new as well? Git blame. That was added by Brian in December 2025, so that was added after we rolled out the new CDF. So with DNN CSS include, you can now do the property preload equals true or false. But yeah, you can go on forever. Of course, we could never cover the complete feature set of everything you can do now with the link in HTML, neither for script with that. If I go to where that code is, it will obviously be very close to the DNN-JS include. And here we go, similar thing. Now we've got async, defer, and no module as booleans in the in your tags supported. But if you need to go further, then you have to use dependency injection and craft it, if you like. But yeah. So, any other questions? Nope. Then I thank you for your attendance of this session. Thank you.